Hello everybody and welcome to Grey History, episode 100, Revolutionary Until the Peace. Returning to Paris from the dark depths of the Vendée, I hope you're ready for one of the most tumultuous periods of French history. From foreign plots to de-Christianization, from the rise of the indulgence to the elimination of factions, the next dozen or so episodes will be a wild and bloody ride. But, almost unbelievably, this is episode 100, and honestly, I really can't believe it. Like all revolutions, none of this would be possible without the support of others. So thank you so much to the entire Grey History community for their unbelievable generosity. And thank you to those helping the show in any other way, particularly those recommending it to friends and family. I don't know what the future has for the podcast in 2026, yet what I can tell you with certainty is that I need your support. In listening to 100 episodes of Grey History, you've listened to perhaps 10,000 hours of research, writing, recording, swearing, recording again, and then more work. If you're enjoying history that isn't black and white, and if you'd like to listen to more of it, both now and in the future, then please sponsor the show today for as little as a coffee or two a month. Support the show today at patreon.com. Of course, it's with great pleasure that I welcome the newest virtuous citizens, Ben, Gareth, Reza, and Josh. Another special thank you to longtime supporter Claude for increasing his pledge and becoming a true revolutionary. Finally, we all know that the people need champions, and their latest champion is Randy. Thank you all for joining the fabulous Grey History community, and a final shout out to the Pantheon of Heroes, Brian, Jeff, Kevin R., Scott, Howard, Hilberto, Kevin S., and Griff. Once again, thank you so much to every community member keeping this show on the air. There must be a Republican will. It must be Republican or Royalist. For it to be Republican, there must be Republican ministers, Republican papers, Republican deputies, and a Republican government. The problem for Maximilien Robespierre was how to create such a government. After half a decade of unrest and revolution, a strong and unquestioned authority had long since collapsed. Indeed, when we last left Paris in the autumn of 1793, the sans-culottes controlled the capital. Having surrounded the convention on the 5th of September, delegations from the Paris Commune and the Parisian Jacobin Club had demanded that terror be made the order of the day. Technically, the convention had slyly deflected this request, yet, as historian Timothy Tackett notes, for all practical purposes, the phrase came to characterize state policy. In the weeks that followed, the ultra-radicals achieved unprecedented success. Militarily, economically, and politically, their achievements were simply stunning. Militarily, Hébertist officers were appointed throughout the army, with politics trumping merit in the search for patriotic commanders. Economically, price maximums were finally introduced at the end of September, while politically, the law of suspects had been declared weeks before. Thousands were now promptly locked away, while the scaffold awaited others. Along with the trial and execution of the Queen, the Girondins, and many former heroes of 1789, the final months of 1793 saw continued success for the radicals. However, all things must come to an end, and the ascendancy of the ultras was no different. The challenge of how to respond to the rise of the Hébertists fell to both Danton and Robespierre. For Danton, this was personal. The ultras had been instrumental in ending his tenure on the Committee of Public Safety, but it was their line of attack which represented the greatest threat. Frequently accused of both corruption and moderation, the growing Obertist power was an existential danger. With deputies now regularly arrested due to mere denunciations, Danton knew full well that he could be next. Yet, survival wasn't Danton's only motivation, as we'll see in future episodes. A former minister and member of the Committee of Public Safety, Danton genuinely believed that the ultra-radicals were wrong. Desiring an empowered committee to act as the government's executive, Danton worried that ideological purity was jeopardizing both the war and the revolution. Thus, it was a mixture of personal, political, and policy grievances that fueled this powerful moderate. Steadily recovering his influence from its lows over the summer, Danton was now resolute in reversing the Obertist tide. Importantly, for all his differences with the revolutionary giant, Robespierre would do much the same. Although not personally threatened by the Obertists, at least not yet, Robespierre was hardly an advocate of their radical manifestos. Moreover, he agreed with Danton that there must be a proper republican government if the republic was to survive. But listeners might hear this and say, wait, what does that actually mean? Doesn't a republican government already exist? Well, yes, France was a republic, but I ask you, did it really have a government? For years, the Paris Commune and the capital's political societies had regularly intervened in national affairs. Moreover, multiple national assemblies had been deadlocked by factional squabbles, let alone private interests. Now, the National Convention was technically governing the nation. However, its mandate was only to create a constitution, something which it had already achieved. Outside the convention's own members, the representatives on mission, regularly went rogue in the departments. Likewise, had the Federalist revolts not clearly shown that many local governments were infested with poor Republicans. As historian Robert Palmer notes, for 5 years, France had lacked a government which enjoyed effective authority. Indeed, for 5 years, France had suffered a mixture of revolts, coups, insurrections, and civil war. For 5 years, the nation had been pulled apart by competing interests, which demanded their own supremacy, yet refused to submit to others. Consequently, I ask again, did France really have a government? From Robespierre's perspective, this lack of an effective executive was perhaps the revolution's greatest threat. For him, France required a republican government which was formalized, centralized, and absolute in its authority. Only then could the revolution be secured. To enact this, Robespierre turned to the Committee of Public Safety. The Constitution of 1793 was not designed for a besieged republic, but the Convention had long proven itself unsuited for the task of day-to-day administration. In fact, the Committee of Public Safety had been created back in April because the Convention acknowledged this deficiency. However, concerns over the separation of powers had seen the body insufficiently strengthened. This was always problematic, but now policies such as mass conscription, price controls, and the law of suspects required a strong administration to succeed. As Robert Palmer notes, these measures would have been useless without a relatively stable body to integrate and apply them. Given the revolution's increasingly ambitious agenda and the capital's growing instability, Robespierre was rapidly adopting two central objectives in September 1793. Firstly, he would seek to curtail the destabilizing influence of the ultras, and secondly, he would attempt to empower the Committee of Public Safety. With Obertists seeking to dominate the ministries, and the Convention jealous of its own authority, neither was an easy task. Consequently, Robespierre and his allies moved slowly. As one former minister quipped, When one lacks the power to enforce one's authority, one can only be successful if one acts with great caution. Thus, the slow but steady rise of the Committee of Public Safety began on the 6th of September. The day after the tumultuous events of the 5th, the committee would co-opt its detractors by forming a coalition government. Inviting two of the most prominent radicals to join the committee itself, the deputies Billaud-Varenne and Collot d'Herbois eagerly accepted their promotions. Only the day prior, Billaud-Varenne had led an assault against the committee. Now, his proposal to create a new supervisory body was quietly forgotten. Intriguingly, Robespierre and his allies had intended to broaden this coalition by also elevating a moderate ally of Danton. The convention then went further, decreeing, without the committee's approval, that Danton himself should rejoin the committee. Yet, having claimed for more than a month that he would never again sit on committees, Danton immediately resigned. Meanwhile, his ally pleaded sickness and also declined to serve. Just why Danton refused this elevation is a matter of historical debate. Yes, he had publicly vowed not to do so, as he had lobbied for the committee's empowerment throughout August. But some scholars suggest he knew that he would be unable to work closely with Robespierre and his associates, while others propose that Danton was simply fatigued. Whatever the case, Danton's refusal to join the committee did not prevent him from advancing its agenda. In fact, quite the opposite. Unable to break directly with the ascendant Hébertists, both Danton and Robespierre played a longer and subtler game. In a clever assault against the power of the ultra-radicals, Danton was instrumental in curtailing the permanence of the city's 48 sectional assemblies. The city's sections were a hotbed for ultra-radicalism, and in arguing that their frequent meetings made them vulnerable to royalist intrigue, Danton successfully neutered their revolutionary potential. Henceforth, meetings were restricted to just twice a week, and citizens would be paid to participate. In minimising sessions and maximising attendance, the deputies were making it harder for a small group of ultras to dominate the capital's politics. Additionally, the Committee of Public Safety moved swiftly against those ultra-radicals not protected by the Hébertists. Since Marat's death, Hébert had been locked in a power struggle with the enraged to lead the ultra-revolutionary left. In many ways, the genuine leaders of the popular movement, Jacques Roux and the enraged, were a threat to various Jacobin factions. As such, Roux's arrest was eagerly accepted. Yes, there was a danger in consolidating the sans-culottes behind the Hébertists in Town Hall, but Robespierre hoped that policy concessions would gain the committee time. In the weeks that followed, price maximums and the law of suspects were promptly introduced. Yet, despite the elevation of like-minded deputies, Hébert kept up the pressure on both the Committee of Public Safety and the National Convention. For Hébert, his priority was to implement the Constitution of 1793. This would not only abolish the Committee of Public Safety, but would formally empower the ministers it currently supervised. With that accomplished, the ultras could seize the agenda of a future Republican government. Remember, the War Ministry was already staffed by ultra-radicals, and Hébert was calculating that he could stack other ministries as well as become a minister himself. Indeed, Hébert had tried to become Interior Minister in August, and he had been stopped by both Danton and Robespierre. Faced with this renewed campaign at the Jacobins, it was once again Danton who led the convention's rebuff. Denouncing as bad citizens all who would unreasonably attack the Committee of Public Safety, these words were an interesting choice. Unbeknownst to him, the next assault against the committee would come from the convention itself. As both Robespierre and Danton delicately sought to quiet the streets of Paris, the Commune and the clubs were not the only threat to the Committee of Public Safety. Although supported by Danton and including Robespierre, the committee had no shortage of opponents within the National Convention. These detractors were a mixed lot: Jacobins, Girondins, and Independents. To clarify, remember that while the Girondin leadership was now largely detained or on the run, many supporters remained in the convention until October's secondary purge. That was still almost a month away. Now, on this broad range of disgruntled deputies, grievances varied between each individual. Some had genuine policy differences, while others had personal self-interest. For the former, it's important to keep in mind that the convention had long resisted the demands of the militant sans-culottes. Many were displeased by the measures being developed to appease them. Likewise, others were distraught at the recent loss of Toulon at the end of August and believed new leadership was desperately required. Critically, when these challenges came to a head in mid-September, the Committee of Public Safety scored 2 consequential victories. These manoeuvres hardly established the committee's fabled dictatorship, but for many historians, they were considerable steps in that direction. The first of these victories came in the second week of September, just days after the triumph of the sans-culottes on the 5th. Seeking to harness his momentum, Hébert had continued his attacks on the Committee of Public Safety. Similar sentiments were then repeated by radical deputies in the convention, who demanded the renewal of another committee, the Committee of General Security. Now, we haven't talked much about the Committee of General Security, but in many ways it will become the convention's number 2 committee. The CGS was responsible for the police, surveillance, and justice, a considerable task even in normal times. Of course, the autumn of 1793 was anything but normal, and with the law of suspects and the Revolutionary Tribunal, this committee's power was significant. In fact, historian George Lefebvre likens the committee to the Ministry of the Terror. However, a week before the law of suspects, a radical deputy warned of the power of the convention's numerous committees. Noting that various committees wielded significant influence in developing legislation, he denounced several as inactive and corrupt. Targeting the Committee of General Security in particular, numerous radicals convinced the convention to renew the CGS entirely. 2 days later, on the 11th of September, the convention nominated 9 new members. Worryingly for some, promoted deputies included several with radical tendencies. Yet, while this may sound like a setback for both Danton and Robespierre, it soon became a victory for the Committee of Public Safety. With continued denunciations against other committees, Danton seized the initiative. Echoing Hébert at the Jacobins, he demanded that every committee be renewed, including the freshly elected Committee of General Security. However, Danton proposed that the Committee of Public Safety be left untouched. Moreover, he suggested that it should nominate every other committee. The convention agreed, and the Committee of Public Safety had gained enormous power. Now in a position to handpick every committee of the convention, the Grand Committee was entrusted with considerable influence over the body's legislation and actions. After all, every nominated deputy owed their position to the Committee of Public Safety. Swiftly wielding this newfound power and demonstrating its importance, new committees were promptly installed. Interestingly, the new Committee of General Security was composed of only a quarter of the deputies which the convention had elected just 3 days prior. Radicals were sidelined as allies were enthroned. But the renewal of almost 24 committees inflamed discontent. In short order, another challenge was presented to the Committee of Public Safety, this time not by radicals, but by those outraged by either slights and demotions or setbacks and decrees. The attack commenced on the 25th of September, when the military situation was deteriorating. Toulon had fallen weeks prior, while the salvation of Dunkirk was followed by renewed defeats. Likewise, the Vendée remained a mess, as the aristocratic General Conclus received little support, if not outright sabotage, from rival Hébertist officers. It was in these circumstances that a Danton ally named Thuriot rose to denounce the ultras. Critically, Thuriot had been the last Dantonist on the Committee of Public Safety, yet he had resigned just 5 days prior. For those counting, this took the committee's membership down to 12, the so-called 12 who ruled. Henceforth, it was only executions which would change its membership for almost an entire year. Disagreeing with Robespierre on both the war effort and the terror, the freshly liberated Thuriot was now free to speak his mind. Choosing to attack the ultras rather than the committee directly, he denounced the rising influence of the rogues and scoundrels whose bloodlust was advancing tyranny. They are now trying to accredit throughout the Republic that it cannot be sustained unless men of blood are raised to all positions, men who since the beginning of the revolution have distinguished themselves only by their love for carnage. It seems that we only made the revolution for men who did nothing for it, except what they did to seize the reins of the Republic. Citizens, we have overthrown the schemers who wanted to establish royalty. Well, we will also overthrow the party of rogues and scoundrels. It is necessary that only the voice of virtue and truth be heard here. It is necessary that the sacred rules of morality be recognized by all. Yes, liberty is the work of morality, and it can only be preserved by it. Far, then, from its altars be men who have no offering to present it than blood. No, men will only be truly republican when morality has regained its empire. We must stop this impetuous torrent which is dragging us to barbarism. We must stop the successes of tyranny. Seizing this broadside against the Hébertist rogues, others pounced on the men of blood. Yet, as a host of disgruntled deputies took their chance to challenge the ascendant radicals, some attacked the Committee of Public Safety. After all, the committee had sanctioned the elevation of radical officers, the removal of veteran aristocrats, and the supposed strategies which were seemingly losing the war. Moreover, they had consented to ultra-radical policies, things like price maximums, the law of suspects, and revolutionary armies of roaming sans-culottes. Of course, these concessions had been essentially forced from the convention by Parisian radicals 3 weeks prior. But that doesn't change the fact that it was the committee turning demands into policy. Some deputies took issue with the revolution's rising radicalism, while others agreed with Thuriot that the Republic was being dragged towards barbarism as scoundrels demanded terror. However, as mentioned previously, this opposition was not merely about policy. As the debate developed, personal interests distorted proceedings. Ranging from self-interested corruption to the outrage of bruised egos, there was a wide cohort of deputies seeking to make trouble. Luckily for them, this disgruntlement could be easily disguised with quite reasonable questions. Why was the war worsening? Why were rogues and scoundrels being promoted throughout the Republic? Why should the Committee of Public Safety be left in office, let alone granted further powers, when its progress seemed minimal at best? In short order, the committee was summoned to deliver immediate answers. By now, the Committee of Public Safety was facing an existential crisis. Legally, the convention had complete authority over its committee, and thus this threat was far greater than Hébert's relentless campaign in both the clubs and the sections. Silence was simply impossible, and the task for rebuttal initially fell to Bertrand Barrère. Reprising his usual capacity as the committee's principal mouthpiece, Barrère delivered a scorching rebuke of the day's proceedings. Decrying plots to undermine the committee and destroy the National Convention, his fiery speech was overshadowed by the words that came next. Delivering one of his greatest speeches, it was none other than Robespierre himself who led the cavalry. Convinced that the committee's replacement would result in the revolution's collapse, what followed was a rhetorical masterpiece. Given its eloquence and its importance, I will quote extensive sections of the speech. As I do so, I want you to note 3 things. Firstly, his deliberate and constant association of denunciations with foreign conspiracies. Secondly, his passionate defense of the actions undertaken by the committee. Finally, his insistence that if the committee does not have the confidence of the convention, it must resign and be renewed. Here is Robespierre at his best. If my status as a member of the Committee of Public Safety should prevent me from explaining what happened with complete independence, I must abdicate it immediately, and after separating from my colleagues, whom I esteem and honour, and it is known that I am not lavish with this sentiment, I will tell my country some necessary truths. The truth is the only weapon left in the hands of the intrepid defenders of liberty to defeat the perfidious agents of the aristocracy. He who seeks to debase, to divide, to paralyse the convention is an enemy of the fatherland, whether he sits in this chamber or whether he is a foreigner. Whether he acts out of stupidity or perversity, he is on the side of the tyrants who are waging war against us. Now, this plan of debasement exists. It exists in the very places where patriotism should reign, in the clubs that claim to be more than patriotic. War is being waged against the convention in the person of all the defenders of liberty. But what would be most deplorable would be if this cowardly system had supporters here. We are accused of doing nothing. But have we thought about our position? 11 armies to lead, the weight of all of Europe to bear, traitors everywhere to unmask, emissaries bribed by the gold of foreign powers to outwit, unfaithful administrators to monitor and pursue, everywhere to smooth out obstacles and hindrances to the execution of the wisest measures, all the tyrants to combat, all the conspirators to intimidate, almost all of them in a caste so powerful in the past through its wealth and still through its intrigues. Such are our functions. Do you believe that, without unity of action, without secrecy in operations, without the certainty of finding support in the convention, the government can triumph over so many obstacles and so many enemies? No, only the most extreme ignorance, the most profound perversity, can claim that in such circumstances one is not an enemy of the fatherland when one makes a cruel game of degrading those who hold the helm of affairs, of hindering their operations, of slandering their conduct. Robespierre proceeds to list the accusations against the committee and respond to each with justifications. He then continues by further linking attacks to a foreign conspiracy and directly denouncing those deputies who had criticised the committee. This is not about individuals. It is about the homeland and principles. I declare it. It is impossible that in this state of affairs the committee can save the public good. And if anyone challenges it, I will remind you how perfidious is, how extensive is, the system of debasing and dissolving us, how many agents, foreigners, and internal enemies have paid for this purpose. I will remind you that the faction is not dead, that it conspires from the depths of its dungeons, that the serpents of the swamp are not yet all crushed. The men who perpetually declaim, either here or elsewhere, against the men who are at the head of the government, have themselves given proof of incivility or baseness. Why then do they want to degrade us? Which of our actions has earned us this ignominy? I know that we cannot flatter ourselves that we have reached perfection, but when it is necessary to support a republic surrounded by enemies, to arm reason in favour of liberty, to destroy prejudices, to render null and void individual efforts against the public interest, then strengths are needed, moral and physical, that nature has perhaps refused, both to those who denounce us and to those whom we fight. The committee has rights to the hatred of kings and rogues. If you do not believe in its zeal, in the services it has rendered to the public good, break this instrument. But first examine your circumstances. Those who denounce us are themselves denounced to the committee. From accusers they are today, they will become accused. But who are the men who rise up against the conduct of the committee, and who in this session have aggravated your setbacks, to aggravate their denunciations? The first declared himself a supporter of Custine. He was the persecutor of the patriots in an important fortress, and recently he dared to open the opinion of abandoning a territory united to the Republic, whose inhabitants, denounced by him, are today defending themselves energetically against the fanatics and the English. The second has yet repaired the shame with which he covered himself by returning from a place entrusted to his defence, after having surrendered it to the Austrians. Without doubt, if such men succeed in proving that the committee is not composed of good citizens, liberty is lost. Without doubt, it will not be them that enlightened opinion will give its confidence and hand over the reins of government. Let no one think that my intention here is to make imputation for imputation. I undertake never to divide patriots, but I do not include among patriots those who only have the mask, and I will reveal the conduct of 2 or 3 traitors who are here the artisans of discord and dissension. I therefore think that the fatherland is lost if the government does not enjoy unlimited confidence, and if it is not composed of men who deserve it. I demand that the Committee of Public Safety be renewed. As Robespierre returned to the benches of the Convention, the Incorruptible had achieved a stunning victory. By defending the actions of the committee, by threatening its mass resignation, and by linking the day's attacks not to reasonable criticisms but to foreign plots and conspiracies, Robespierre had won the day. In an instant, detractors leapt to prove their innocence. In an instant, the Convention, having had its glory linked to the success of those it had entrusted, felt compelled to reaffirm its choice. In an instant, the committee's own supporters, numerous amongst the Jacobins, were bellowing from their seats, refusing to accept any resignations at a moment of perpetual crisis. In the end, the committee had not only survived this unexpected assault, it had thrived. As historian Albert Matisse states, the opposition had been overawed. Yet, to understand why the 25th of September is such a key point in the French Revolution, we need to re-examine the contents of this speech. This was more than a mere victory in parliamentary manoeuvres. It is a foundational pillar for the revolution's bloody future. By now, in late September, the Girondin leadership were awaiting trial. In roughly a week, their indictment was formally announced, while a second purge of the convention arrested dozens of Girondin sympathisers. With the doors locked and deputies literally pulled from their seats, the convention heard how elected representatives had engaged in foreign conspiracies. Bringing forth these accusations was the Committee of General Security, a committee hand-picked by the Committee of Public Safety only weeks before. Shortly thereafter, almost 24 deputies were dead. With elected representatives, Girondin and Montagnard, killed for alleged conspiracies, Robespierre's speech on the 25th of September steadily gained importance. Remember, Robespierre had denounced all who seek to divide the convention as enemies of the nation. He had proclaimed that an international conspiracy had agents amongst his own peers. In tying disgruntled deputies to foreign plots and counter-revolution, Robespierre had equated opposition to treason. To paraphrase the Incorruptible, it was irrelevant whether a deputy acted out of stupidity or perversity. Those who debase, divide, and paralyze the convention were an enemy on the side of tyrants. For historian Robert Palmer, an expert on the dynamics of the Committee of Public Safety, this was a pivotal moment. Establishing a pretext to accuse and eliminate the committee's political opposition, Palmer notes the consequences of the day. At Robespierre's continued insistence, the convention solemnly affirmed its confidence in the committee. So the 12 remained. Once a month, for 10 months, the convention re-elected the same men to govern France. The dictatorship of the 12 was greatly advanced by their parliamentary victory on September 25. It became clear from Robespierre's speech that serious criticism of the government would henceforth be dangerous in the convention. Opposition became a project for debasement, dissent a treasonous connivance with foreign powers. The committee, as Barrère said, was an extract, a resume, a small image of the convention, as the convention was of the sovereign people. To raise difficulties for the committee was therefore identical with counter-revolution. The will of the country was supposed to be embodied in 12 men, not as individuals, not by a principle of personal leadership, but because they were members, first of the convention, and second of that miniature of the convention which was its governing body. Thus, from the 25th of September, 1793, outright opposition became increasingly dangerous. Dissent was hardly silenced overnight, but the convention was on notice. Henceforth, sustained and vocal criticism against the Committee of Public Safety could be seen as treasonous. Indeed, from now on, the committee's most famous detractors would all be sent to the guillotine. Yet, even after its victory on the 25th of September, the Committee of Public Safety was far from all-powerful. Overseen by a body defined by its disunity, old habits were hard to shake. Moreover, in an era where accusations of plots and conspiracies were relatively common, the gravity of Robespierre's speech was not immediately apparent. It would take time to silence criticism, aided by the continued arrest and execution of fellow deputies. Demonstrating the fact that the convention retained its independence were the events of 4 October. A week after Robespierre's speech, the committee attempted to introduce considerable reforms to the nation's day-to-day governance. Presenting the decrees as necessary to enact revolutionary measures, Varenne urged his peers to clarify the functions of the constituted authorities. With the Republic beset by crises, the time had come to define the powers of the communes, districts, and departments. Failure to have done so previously had crippled the will of the people. Now, with the committee implementing everything from price controls to mass conscription, it was critical that the powers of local governments be clarified and subordinated. This was a simple necessity, but there was one major problem. If the Committee of Public Safety was to establish its own preeminence as the nation's executive government, it wasn't just local mayors which needed to be controlled. Additionally, the committee needed to constrain their own peers, the representatives on mission. Fellow deputies had long acted independently. They had become mini Caesars, invested with near unlimited power. Wielding this authority in bespoke and contradictory manners, these representatives needed to be curtailed. However, here the committee hit a nerve. In Robespierre's speech the week prior, the Incorruptible had portrayed the committee as attached to the National Convention, explicitly stating that the committee's glory was linked to the success of those whom it had invested the national trust. The committee was about to be hit with an Uno reverse. Crucially, Robespierre's logic also held for representatives on mission. Allegations of impropriety or inaction implied that the convention had erred in those it had empowered. Consequently, the committee's reforms met immediate hostility, while many voiced genuine concerns that the measures would act as straitjackets for deputies in the field. After all, they were fighting everything from federalists to foreigners, and some who had previously been in the departments argued that their peers should not be limited as they struggled against fanatics. Facing immense resistance, the reforms were withdrawn. Setback had followed victory. Yet, for the Committee of Public Safety, disorder was no laughing matter. It was not just Robespierre who saw the need to establish a coherent and effective administration, but the committee as a whole. How could Carnot reform the armies if his orders went ignored? How could Landais feed a nation if his policies for provisioning were left woefully incomplete? How could prosperity be secured, the enemy be crushed, or the will of the people be enacted if the government in Paris could not control the government of France? As Robespierre had written, there must be a republican government. In this, the committee was unanimous. As such, the setbacks on the 4th of October could be nothing but temporary. The committee had to try again. Unable to force their desired measures through a subservient convention, the committee embarked on a more limited approach. For now, they would opt for reforms targeting just the constituted authorities. Representatives on mission would remain untouched. The man responsible for selling this package was Saint-Just. Having made a name for himself during the trial of the king, the convention's youngest deputy had been sitting on the committee since May. Helpful in shaping the Constitution of 1793, he would now play an even larger role in digging the document's grave. His speech on the 10th of October marks a defining moment. Yet, to understand its contents and its consequence, we must start at the beginning. As Saint-Just outlines the problems besieging the nation, I want you to note two things. Firstly, his assertion that the nation's poor administration had betrayed the people's will. Secondly, his demands for swift and violent action against all who impede that will. Saint-Just proclaimed, "Why is it necessary, after so many laws and so much care, to still call your attention to the abuses of government in general, to the economy and subsistence? Your wisdom and the just wrath of the patriots have not yet overcome the malignity which, everywhere, fights the people and the revolution. The laws are revolutionary. Those who execute them are not. It is time to announce a truth that henceforth must never leave the minds of those who will govern. The Republic will only be founded when the will of the sovereign represses the monarchical minority and reigns over it by right of conquest. You no longer have anything to spare against the enemies of the new order of things, and liberty must win at whatever price it may be. Your Committee of Public Safety, placed at the centre of all results, has calculated the causes of public misfortunes. It has found them in the weakness with which your decrees are executed, in the lack of economy of the administration, in the instability of the views of the state, in the vicissitude of the passions which influence the government. It is therefore decided to explain to you the state of affairs, and to present to you the means with which it believes are appropriate for consolidating the revolution, for overthrowing federalism, for relieving the people and providing them with abundance, for strengthening the armies, for cleansing the state of the conspiracies which infest it. There is no prosperity to be hoped for as long as the last enemy of liberty breathes. You have to punish not only the traitors, but even the indifferent. You have to punish anyone who is passive in the Republic and does nothing for it. For since the French people have manifested their will, everything that is opposed to it is outside the sovereign. Everything that is outside the sovereign is an enemy. If conspiracies had not troubled this empire, if the fatherland had not been 1,000 times the victim of indulgent laws, it would be pleasant to govern by maxims of peace and natural justice. These maxims are good among the friends of liberty, but between the people and their enemies, there is nothing more in common than the sword. Those who cannot be governed by justice must be governed by the sword. Tyrants must be oppressed. Having called for the punishment of traitors and the indifferent, Saint-Just focused repeatedly on the enemy within, specifically the enemy within the government. According to Saint-Just, it was not inadequate measures which fueled the nation's woes, but their inadequate execution by officials across the country. Consequently, the government itself was the enemy. Denouncing its inertia, carelessness, conspiracies, and corruption, the Republic's misfortunes were the fault of self-interested officials who advanced nefarious plots. Citizens, all the enemies of the Republic are in its government. In vain you waste yourselves in this chamber making laws. In vain your committee. In vain some ministers support you. Everything conspires against them and you. So, having denounced the deep state of the 18th century, what precisely was Saint-Just suggesting? Well, on behalf of the committee, he went much further than a series of mere administrative reforms. Instead, Saint-Just proposed revolutionary government. To appreciate the significance of this proposal, we must make a distinction between regular and revolutionary government. In October 1793, the Constitution remained unimplemented. For some, this was outrageous, as the Convention had no mandate to remain in government now that a constitution had been proclaimed. Advocates for the Convention's dissolution came from across the political spectrum. The Albertists desired it as a path towards greater power, but so too did many departmental elites who likewise sought advantage. Remember, some who had flirted with the Federalist revolts had opted against rebellion, believing they could simply vote out their opponents once fresh elections had been called. But as Saint-Just described a nation beset by innumerable enemies, including the government itself, the idea of implementing the Constitution was simply impractical. France faced a state of emergency. The Republic had to respond. Consequently, Saint-Just proposed the Constitution's indefinite suspension, calling for the Convention to remain in office until victory had been achieved. The deputy's logic was clear and astute. Only the extraordinary and violent measures enabled by an irregular government would allow the war to be won. Only the suspension of civil liberties and the pursuit of exceptional acts would allow freedom to be secured. Given this, a revolutionary government was necessary. However, no less necessary was the formalization of this government during these exceptional times. As Saint-Just made his case for the convention to persist for the duration of the war, he argued for the further empowerment of the Committee of Public Safety. In the circumstances in which the Republic finds itself, the Constitution cannot be established. It would be sacrificed by itself. It would become the guarantee of attacks against liberty, because it would lack the violence necessary to repress them. The present government is also too embarrassed. You are too far from all the attacks. The sword of the laws must move everywhere with speed, and your arm must be everywhere present to stop the crime. You must guarantee the independence of the administrations, divide the authority, identify it with the revolutionary movement and with you, and multiply it. You must tighten all the knots of responsibility, direct the power often terrible for patriots and often indulgent for traitors. All duties towards the people are ignored. The insolence of the people in power is unbearable. Fortunes are made quickly. It is impossible for revolutionary laws to be executed if the government itself is not constituted in a revolutionary way. You cannot hope for prosperity if you do not establish a government which, gentle and moderate towards the people, will be terrible towards itself by the energy of its relations. This government must weigh on itself and not on the people. All injustice towards the citizens, all treason, all acts of indifference towards the fatherland, all weakness must be sovereignly repressed. It is necessary to specify the duties, to place the sword everywhere alongside abuse, so that everything is free in the Republic, except those who conspire against it and who govern badly. In short, only a revolutionary government could save the revolution. By the time Saint-Just had finished, the convention was inclined to agree. In the decree which followed, the first article is by far the most famous. The provisional government of France is revolutionary until the peace. Henceforth, the National Convention would remain in office until victory had been achieved. At war with almost an entire continent, that could take a while. However, the second article is equally consequential. The Provisional Executive Council, the ministers, the generals, the constituted bodies, are placed under the supervision of the Committee of Public Safety. From now on, almost all government agents, from mayors to ministers, were under the thumb of the Committee of Public Safety. Consequently, the committee's preeminent position at the head of a powerful new executive was steadily being achieved. To end this episode, it makes sense to take a brief moment to unpack what all this means. For historian Albert Mathieu, the events of 10 October legalized dictatorship, subordinating the revolution's principles for the necessities of the moment. To be clear, Mathieu, a French Marxist, is not being critical or moralistic when he uses the word dictatorship. Instead, he believes that these measures were required for the Republic to succeed. Likewise, Adolphe Thiers, who was by no means a Marxist, uses similar terminology. For Thiers, it was imperative that the revolutionaries adopt a policy towards the unimplemented constitution. By decreeing the permanence of the convention until the arrival of peace, the deputies had embarked on an extraordinary dictatorship until the expiration of all dangers. Critically, with various institutions and office holders placed under the committee's supervision, Thiers claims that the committee gained immense power as none dared to act on their own initiative at a time of frequent denunciations. More broadly, the steady empowerment of the Committee of Public Safety is noted by many scholars. Embattled throughout September, by October 10, the committee was now formally recognized as the Republic's reorganized executive in this new revolutionary government. For Robert Palmer, this development is key, as the body could now theoretically enforce its will throughout every corner of the country. Likewise, Jeremy Popkin notes the irony that upon further reforms in December, the revolutionaries had created a central administration which the absolute monarchy had only dreamt of possessing. To speak plainly, if the 5th of September was the triumph of the sans-culottes, particularly their ultra-radical leadership, then the weeks immediately succeeding it contained several victories for their rivals in the Committee of Public Safety. The road was neither easy nor complete, but Robespierre's goal of creating a powerful republican government was well and truly underway. Unfortunately for many, including Robespierre himself, there were unintended consequences. Thank you for listening to episode 100, Revolutionary Until the Peace. Next episode, we will meet the infamous foreign plot. But before you go, I have a simple question for you. Have you enjoyed the last 100 episodes of Grey History? If you have, then please support the show at patreon.com. I could really use your help to create history that isn't black and white, and there's plenty of perks to enjoy while keeping this podcaster on the air. So please join the revolution today at patreon.com. You can cancel anytime, but for a coffee or two a month, your support would make an immense difference. Grey History is brought to you by its amazing community members, including the heroes of the revolution, Brian, Jeff, Kevin R., Scott, Howard, Hilberto, Kevin S., and Griff. Joining the amazing heroes are the fantastic champions of the people, Cindy, George, William, Laura, Daniel, Monica, Adam, Tom, Eyal, Harold, David, Alistair, Jeff, Ritus, Cameron, Dan, Paul, Deborah, Susan, Danny, Gordon, Matthew, Sophia, Kevin, Scott, Jersey, Alvaro, Eric, the whole country of Luxembourg, and Randy.